delighted to be back with my co-presenter, Ektaa Kumar.
Ali, good afternoon. Welcome again to the Tax Files, a monthly audio podcast where, alongside an esteemed guest, we will be discussing the most pertinent topics for tax and accounting professionals, while also getting to know some key members of the tax industry just a little bit better. Ali, it's been a while. How have you been?
I'm good. As you know, we had the Financial Services Tax Conference, which was absolutely fantastic, but I needed 2 weeks holiday after that. But I didn't get the 2 weeks holiday. I managed to attend a tax conference in Austin, Texas. So I was actually on a ranch on a tax conference, which is a first for me. So very excited, and I'm excited because next week we should be getting the recordings from the conference.
Let me tell you, the amount of feedback that we have gotten from that Financial Services Tax Conference as somebody that was present for the event itself, such an incredible, diverse list of speakers, all with such different, amazing insights into tax-specific legislative changes or reputational changes. It was such a fantastic conference. And to have the number one resident celebrity, Mr. Ali Kazimi, under the same building was just incredible. The amount of people, not just from the UK, but internationally, who came up to me during the conference and said, we so look forward to these things. It is one of the best events that we attend. Was absolutely incredible. So hats off to you and the whole of the Hansuki team for putting this amazing event on. It was incredible. You must have needed at least a couple of weeks of downtime afterwards. But I hear you were on a ranch in Texas learning about sort of other tax topical issues. Ali, no rest for the wicked.
Indeed. So what about yourself? What were you up to?
Honestly, it's amazing how quickly this year is going away now. I've actually myself just come back from a tax event that was hosted in Belgium last week. And rather unfortunately, from coming back from that event, have ended up getting struck down with COVID for the second time, which was not ideal. But back on the mend, back into the swing of things, and hurting towards the end of the year, which is pretty scary.
You're looking good.
Thank you. And listeners, I promise you it is the case. Well, look, we are honoured to be joined by our esteemed guest for today's podcast, Rhiannon Kinghall Were, currently the head of tax policy at McFarlane's. Rhiannon is an expert in UK tax policy and contemporary tax issues, having previously held the role of principal tax policy advisor at the CBI. Somebody who is renowned in the tax field for their knowledge, their repertoire of engagements, and also their presence from a tax perspective. It is my honour to welcome Rhiannon to the Tax Files. Rhiannon, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Rhiannon. My pleasure and honour too. So just in terms of how the podcast goes, we'll talk a little bit about your career journey, get a little bit of advice, input into some of the current taxation developments. And then, importantly, both mine and Ektaa's favorite part is the rapid fire round at the end. So we're looking forward to that.
Likewise.
I hope you're ready, Rhiannon, with the esteemed rapid fire round. Don't worry, we'll have a bit of build up until we get there. How has your week been so far?
I had a good weekend, I guess, enjoying the last of the autumn sunshine. Had a long walk that finished at a microbrewery, so I guess that was quite good. And I had a happy husband who was willing to walk with that at the end. So it's been good, but it's been a busy time on the policy front. Obviously, quite a tumultuous few weeks in politics. So that's been keeping me busy on the work front.
Excellent. So, Rhiannon, I'm sure our listeners are really wanting to find out, for someone like you who's had a illustrious career in taxation, what have been the key highlights?
Thank you. Well, it's maybe worth just starting off with a little bit about my current role, which obviously is a highlight. So I'm head of tax policy at McFarlane's, a city law firm here in London, and in a nutshell, that role involves monitoring new developments in tax and responding to government consultations and keeping clients abreast of all of those developments and how they might affect their business. So it's quite reactive, and really led by the actions of government or other policy coordinators. In terms of milestones, I made the transition from tax advisory into tax policy when I was selected for a secondment when I was at KPMG, and I moved to the CBI. That was a out of the box secondment, so it wasn't actually a tax role. So I was the Director General, who at the time was John Cridland. I was his executive assistant and providing more strategic advice on the big policy issues affecting business. So that was really my leap into the policy world. And at the end of the secondment, I didn't want to risk going back to my desk doing the same role. And I was fortunate that it was at a time when there was a lot of focus on tax. There was a lot of scrutiny of multinational companies and their tax affairs, and it was also just at a point when the OECD were kicking off the first BEPS process. And so, as the CBI didn't have a qualified tax person, I pitched an idea to them that they needed someone, i.e., me, and I then spent the next 5 years there with in the tax team at the CBI, providing support for businesses and obviously feeding into government. So that was definitely another sort of key point in my career.
And Rhiannon, with such an incredible journey so far, kind of the CBI tax policy that is at the forefront of everything that we're doing at this moment in time, taking a step back, why tax? What was it about tax that sort of interested you in the first place?
Well, I studied economics at university, and I was interested in the fiscal policy modules. So I thought that gaining a tax qualification would be interesting. But I think the reality was that doing tax compliance, you're actually very removed from that sort of macro policy environment. You're processing returns, a year or so after changes have been made. And whilst some of those changes are important and they do have an impact on the work that you're doing, I didn't really feel that it satisfied my interests in tax and policy. And I was lucky when I moved to KPMG that I got involved in policy development. It was just on the cusp of the patent box was coming in, and one of the partners I worked with had just returned from a secondment to Treasury. So we worked together on public consultations that came through that process, and I was fortunate enough to have that exposure and working with clients who were making investment decisions off the back of the regime, and that really is what interested me. So I knew that then I wanted to get more involved in tax policy, and I just had to find a route through, and I was lucky enough to have been able to manage that.
And just on that, Rhiannon, I mean, you clearly achieved so much, and I often think about what are the things that motivated you or the influences. So if we had to ask who has been the most influential person in your career or life generally, what would you say?
It's a really good question. There are, I think, lots of things you can admire and learn from people, and I think it really depends at what point you are and where you are in your life. I won't name names, but I have been really lucky to work with some of the leading minds in tax, whether that's heads of tax or professionals, and I think that's been really formative. But I think you also, and I try to take the opportunity to learn from friends and family as well. And at the moment, I help a local refugee family, helping them with their English. And I think when you sort of are in that environment and see people who are dealing with such challenging circumstances where they've fled their home and their loved ones just to reach safety, and that certainly put a lot of things into perspective. And their determination makes me realize how much I take for granted on a day-to-day basis. So I think that, yeah, as I say, there's lots of things you can admire and learn from lots of people from different walks of life.
That's really true. And I think, it's just a test to your varied experience in the past, and all the kind of, I guess, interactions that you've had during the course of your career. I also noticed that you sort of taught English for 2 years in Japan. Is that correct?
That's right. You've definitely read my CV. So post university, I spent 2 years in the city of Fukuoka, it's right in the south of Japan. I was teaching at a high school there for 2 years. It was probably a glorified gap year, in a sense that I got paid, but I was living in an amazing country and getting to travel, make some lifelong friends, both in Japan, Japanese people, and also from people from around the world, and also got to indulge in some Japanese stereotypes of sushi and karaoke. So it was a great experience.
Rhiannon, don't tell us about the karaoke. We're going to have to ask you for a song on the on the tax files.
Oh gosh, well, as long as you don't ask me to do karaoke, I don't mind.
Um, Ekta, I mean that's such a interesting career journey that to take time out, go and visit a foreign country, and perhaps not directly related to tax. I mean, I know that the whole job market is changing so much, and tax careers are changing. I mean, what's your view? I mean, how would that be seen today?
Honestly, as you correctly identified, I think the whole landscape is changing so drastically at the moment, where, gone are the days where people sort of enter a firm and spend their entire lives, slaving away over the kind of, 8 to 12 p.m. and kind of nothing else outside of that. I think a lot of the tax space has sort of started to gain a bit more balance around understanding kind of different career paths, not necessarily being that traditional trajectory of people sort of working, as we say, every hour of every day and spending X amount of years in a practice firm and then sort of moving into the in-house industry side. While that traditional route is still very apparent and there is a lot of respect around that, I think there's a lot more appreciation, I think is probably the right word, for people that have had external experiences and have moved in a different career path other than, that is necessarily subject matter expert related. I think it all comes down to people skills. It comes down to the ability to, carry a conversation with individuals, not just sort of domestically, but internationally. And kind of the roundingness of skill that brings you from taking 2 years out and experiencing something new, whether it be a personal passion, which it definitely sounds like in Rhiannon's case, or whether it be something that's a bit more related to the field that you specialize in. That sort of experience is invaluable from a life perspective. What
I
were
mean,
one of the things that you took away from that experience, Rhiannon? One major takeaway from you from taking 2 years out to do something completely different to, I guess, the day to day for you? What would have been one of the biggest takeaways?
I think being around people from lots of different countries and being able to travel, I think at that point it was, having been to school in the UK and university in the UK, I hadn't really had that exposure, and I think it really sort of, yeah, opened my eyes. Certainly Japanese culture is very different to the UK, but then also being able to interact with people from around the globe who were also doing a similar pursuit to me was a really good experience. And I think then, as you say, sort of rounded me and set me up for actually then starting my career.
sure. I mean, I can vouch for what Ekta is saying as a recruiter. I think diversity of experience is now actually, you just have to be open and actually you bring something to it. It's not a disadvantage. It's actually you're bringing in people who are more well-rounded. Now, diversity is obviously sort of like a really important theme in the current environment. And I was just going to sort of like say that one of the things that you're very, heavily involved in is the Women in Tax, which I believe you recently won an award for as well. Rhiannon, what is it that drives you to, spend the time and the effort and all the passion that you bring to it for the Women in Tax, work that you do?
I think I've been lucky in my career to have a really strong network, and some of those are women, but it's been across the tax community, and I think part of the the initiative behind Women in Tax was to create that core network, perhaps for people that don't either have the opportunity or don't have the privilege of that network, and so back in 2015, when Women in Tax was set up, it was born out of an idea from Heather Self, who brought together a group of us across practice and industry and HMRC, and I think it has been a real game changer. I mean, one of the things that prompted Women in Tax, there was an all male panel, and I think what was so provocative at the time that it was introduced as a diverse panel, because there was a lawyer, there was an accountant, there was someone from business, and there was someone from government on, but it was all men. And I think that was, as I say, the real provocation. And I think since then, I don't think any credible organisation in the UK would dream of hosting a tax event in the UK with all men. So I think that we've seen progress, but obviously Women in Tax is not, that's not its only pursuit. As I say, it's really been about creating a network of women to raise their voice, support them in their career, empower them, and we get requests to make connections. Requests to recommend someone to speak at events. We get requests for quotes in newspapers, so that you don't just see the usual suspects. As you say, we won an award earlier this summer for the contribution we made, and we also had a tax journal edition, which was edited by us, and that allowed us to showcase women working in tax who don't always necessarily get the opportunity to write. And as the editor, actually, Paul Sainford said to us, actually, not only do they not have the opportunity, but they also don't come forward. And from that edition, we've had a really great reception, and also creating a pipeline so that hopefully we'll see more variety and more from women working in tax.
Women in Tax was really at the forefront. I remember, and I think it was 2015 when it sort of all started off, and the events that the kind of organisation was hosting. It was really around building a support network for people with that sort of expertise, and kind of having a cohort of individuals who are like-minded, but also kind of clear, focused on growing a community almost of individuals, which is sort of absolutely huge now from kind of everything that we see online and kind of in person of what you were doing. The annual Women in Tax debate is obviously coming up, and from what I can see, I believe the subject is taxing the wealthy and what is fair. From your opinion, with with the light of your head of tax policy role, but also sort of mixing in the work that you do with women in tax, what does fair tax mean for you at the moment? It's such a broad topic, and I'd be so interested to hear your thoughts on kind of that phrase. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really timely discussion, actually, because I think tax increases are certainly in the news again, and I think with that there are then questions around how you can increase tax and who you should increase taxes on. So the wealthy are likely to be in target. In terms of the women in tax debate, we've got some good speakers. We've got Ben Tippett, he's a researcher and an advocate of a wealth tax. We've also got someone, Christina Johansson, who's a founding member of the Patriotic Millionaires organization, and that, I think that's really interesting that you have got wealthy individuals who again are also advocating to using their voice to advocate for a more stable and inclusive economy. But I think, I mean, in terms of my perspective, I think politically it will be quite difficult to introduce in the UK a wealth tax per se. But I think with the current environment around tax increases, we're likely to see other existing taxes, I think, are vulnerable to change, whether that's capital gains tax, non-doms, inheritance tax. I think all of those are likely to be vulnerable. So we'll have to wait and see. We've got another fiscal event next month on the 17th of November. So it's likely that we might see either some announcements or consultations announced.
What I find interesting is, I mean, the term the wealthy. I believe the opposition doesn't allow that. I think we must refer to them as those with broad shoulders. But anyway, that's a separate discussion. But it's going to be very interesting times. And I think for the foreseeable future, tax policy experts will definitely be in demand. But it has, as a tax practitioner, made our jobs and tasks very, very difficult because of the uncertainty. I mean, you obviously played a foundational role at the CBI. I mean, what do you see as, looking at it from employers' perspective or from a business perspective, are the things that businesses should be planning for, or should be, lobbying government for, in order to remain competitive in a very, very challenging business environment?
It's a good question. I think we're certainly at an inflection point, and there clearly needs to be some consensus about how we move forward. The fiscal challenges are obviously quite acute in the UK, but are not necessarily unique. And I think other governments are also grappling with the repercussions from the pandemic. You've also got issues like the digitalization of the economy, and obviously the OECD has been leading the way on that, and then also things like climate change. And so I think some of the issues there, we're going to see integrated responses, and the role of the OECD is likely to be pivotal in the coming years. From a domestic perspective, though, the UK's public finances, as I say, I think that raising taxes are going to be part of the next few years for the UK to regain some credibility. And this is going to be difficult because of the political environment, and the fact that people in the UK and elsewhere are suffering from the cost of living crisis, and the big levers that the government has at its disposal, each, income tax, national insurance contributions, and VAT, all of those come with huge challenges. So there are no easy solutions, and I think there's going to be a lot of focus and conversations about how we get through these quite uncharted waters.
Well, in a post-Brexit sort of like environment, we have a bit more freedom, perhaps, than we had before. And one of those freedoms is perhaps in the launch of the asset holding company, the qualified asset holding company. We've had many other investment structures launched in the UK before. How optimistic are you that this will attract the private equity industry to launch things onshore?
Well, I don't think it's probably important not to exaggerate the impact that this will have. I don't foresee the UK's asset holding company regime sparking the end of Luxembourg. I think those funds that already have a big presence in Luxembourg will remain there. But I think over time, and certainly those growing funds, the UK offers an alternative, and I think as long as the regime is given time to bed in, and some of the complexities and some of the issues around the edges are dealt with, I think the UK offers a viable alternative, as I say, for perhaps those funds that are growing, or perhaps where it just doesn't make sense to have that Luxembourg presence, either the expense or just the nature of their strategies mean that it doesn't make sense. From my understanding, I think there have been about 40 or so registrations for asset holding companies in the first 6 months that the regime has been live, which I think is a really positive sign that actually there is appetite for their use, and over time we'll see more come on board, I'm sure.
Okay. And what other measure do you think is really going to have the impact on the asset management industry that you're seeing, or movement that you think is going to be important?
The other area that I've been looking at is around shell entities, and there's a proposal from the Commission. It gets colloquially referred to as ATAD 3, and it's an initiative that's designed to tackle the use of shell entities that have a minimal level of substance, that have perhaps been used for improper tax purposes. And the Commission's proposals are to introduce some minimum substance tests to identify at-risk entities. Now, I think on first reading of that directive, it is incredibly broad and quite wide-ranging. There is no de minimis, so it's intended to apply to all companies and funds, irrespective of size. And it also applies to all undertakings, so regardless of legal form. But my understanding is that it's currently undergoing some serious amendments, and so potentially it won't quite have the teeth, but I think it will change if it gets through, and if there's agreement from member states. I think it will change the standards and expectations around substance, and so you might see then member states individually using that as their sort of new standards. But we'll have to wait and see for the next iteration of the directive.
So, Ekta, what are the chances of people moving out of the UK to Luxembourg in order to infuse substance to the structures there?
It's a real agenda point, I would say, of people looking at what the reality around substance versus sort of having something physical on the ground without anything behind it goes. Look, I think with all of these measures that are coming into the market, particularly from a UK perspective, it is designed and driven to retain talent and policy and everything investment wise here in the UK. And I think that's a really positive thing, right? There's been so much confusion around the landscape, what it means for individual companies, that what the UK has always been subject to, although, not so drastically, but definitely we sort of started to see a bit of a shift of people sort of saying, actually, what are we doing in the UK? Maybe we should be exploring different territories across Europe. So hopefully a lot of these new measures that are coming in will incentivize companies to start to kind of retain and kind of keep their talents here in the UK. But the rate of change is shocking at the moment. We are doing this podcast with a new prime minister in situ at the moment, having just sort of thrown a mini budget out the window, with a new one coming up in a couple of weeks' time. It's a little bit a bit of a roller coaster, I would say, at the moment, around the kind of changing landscape to do with tax. Rhiannon, for you, with so many different things coming into the market at the moment around policy and tax treatment, tax transparency, all of these different things, how do you keep up to date with the new ongoings in the tax world? What is your kind of methodology or principle around keeping up to date with these new things that are coming into the market?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what my job is keeping up to date, keeping my nose to the ground as to what's going on. I mean, there's lots of different ways. There's obviously things that technology can help with, and using alerts, making sure that you can get quick updates on some of those changes. I mean, just the last couple of weeks has been incredible from a UK perspective in terms of getting to know who are the new ministers, and before you know it, they've changed again, and there's a series of changes on the policies as well. But I think that we're probably hopefully about to embark on a little bit of stability. So getting to know those new policymakers will be important. But I go back to the strength of having a network, and being able to talk to people, and having events face to face, and that networking. I think it's always incredible, the power of a network. You were talking earlier about your conference, and I think that by convening people together, you always take something away, whether it's about a new development, or understanding things from a different perspective. So all of that is really part and parcel of my job, and an important aspect.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rhiannon. We've had the benefit of hearing about your really interesting career journey. We talked a little bit about your role and the work that you're doing with women in tax, and it sounds like that's having a really big impact. And finally, we talked a little bit about some of the key tax developments in a very uncertain time, but particularly for the investment management industry. We talked about the asset holding companies, and also the 83. And it's really good to hear that you're positive about the asset holding company. With that, I think we're ready to move to our favorite round, aren't we, Ektaa?
I think it's time for the rapid fire, Rhiannon. And then tell me, how are you feeling before we launch into this
Uh,
round?
I'm a little nervous as to
Oh,
what may be coming, but it's all in good fun. So let's go.
well, without further ado, are you ready, Rhiannon?
Yes,
Amazing. Right, are you ready for the rapid fire round, Rhiannon?
yes, ready.
Brilliant. Books or TV?
Books,
Coffee or tea?
tea.
Bad haircut or bad dye job?
Oh, bad dye job.
Led Zeppelin or Fleetwood Mac?
It's got to be Fleetwood Mac.
Zombies or vampires?
Oh, zombies.
Early bird or night owl?
Oh, I love the morning, so I guess an early bird. Although I need an alarm clock.
Kim Kardashian or Paris Hilton?
Kim Kardashian.
What is your favourite book that you've ever read?
Oh, there's a book by Elif Shafak, 10 minutes and 38 seconds in a strange world. She's a Turkish writer, but it really puts you into Istanbul. It's a really great book.
Sorry, I was just going to say, have you been to Istanbul?
I have a few times, and it's such a great city. Just the smell, and the chaos, and the food. It's a really great city. So yeah, really enjoyed visiting.
Right, this one for our readers. Definitely put that on your read list if it's going to transport you there, because I've heard
Mm.
is fantastic. What is your biggest fear, Rhiannon?
Oh, biggest fear. Well, I hate spiders. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how deep you're trying to get with that question, but yeah, spiders are not good in the house.
Is a fear of everyone. And lastly, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Ooh, well, I definitely think you should, in terms of career, I've tried to get into a bit of tax that I enjoy. So I definitely recommend that, because you work for such a large part of your life that you really need to enjoy. So definitely look for that. And then a piece of advice someone gave to me about sort of dwelling on things, and they said the 10-year test, and they suggested you should ask yourself whether something would matter in 10 days, and it might. Does it matter in 10 months? And probably not, but maybe. But then ask yourself, will it matter in 10 years? And the chances are no. So don't dwell on things is my advice.
What a great piece of advice. You made it, Rhiannon. You survived the rapid fire round.
Oh, thank you. It's tough. I was on edge.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rhiannon. But I was just going to ask, I mean, there's lots of listeners at different stages in their career. I mean, what specific advice would you give from a tax policy perspective to tax advisors generally, what to look out for, or some piece of information that you may wish to impart?
Well, I think being able to be up to date is really important. So I think anyone, whether heads of tax or those working in the advisory space, you really have to be up to date, and I think clients expect that, and heads of tax are increasingly much more involved in policy making. So it's a really important part of the job. As we know, tax is obviously always changing, and at the moment it's highly volatile. So it makes that job a little bit harder. But following people on Twitter, or making sure you're signed up to different advisors and their updates is probably a good place to start.
Definitely great advice. Knowledge is power.
Indeed.
Well, thank you for listening to the Tax Files. It's been a pleasure as always. Please subscribe and get in contact if you wish to discuss any of these topics with us and our team, or if you have any questions at all. To stay up to date with announcements, updates, and guest reveals, please follow Hansuki on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rhiannon. You've been a wonderful guest. And of course, Ektaa, great to have had this podcast. We just hope to see you again soon, and do tune in. Thank you very much.